Just start a brief little intro here, and then I'll pass it off to you. But I do want to thank everybody for coming up here today for another episode of Junior Resource Investing. This is a podcast dedicated to deepening your understanding of the junior resource sector and exciting plays within it, such as Invictus Energy. I'm your host, Matthew, and I'm joined by my special host, Mark, once again, who helped me out in our last interview with Scott, which went so well. Exciting news out recently for Invictus. There's a string of news releases that Scott's going to talk us through here. Everybody here, I'm sure that you are aware of the Invictus story, but for those of you who aren't, initially their first well is upcoming spud right out just in a matter of weeks away, targeting Mukuyu prospect, targeting 4.3 billion barrel oil equivalent in a single drill. But this is not about that today. Actually, the big news right now is that there's a brand new official expansion of the land package to include the Cabora Bassa Basin Margin play. And so that's what the focus of this will be today, is that, and of course, other recent news releases. So the way this is going to work is that Scott will start off the conversation with a bit of a presentation, and there will be room for questions afterwards. I'll just ask you that you feel free to type them into the chat. And if you want to actually speak with Scott, you'll just have to request to unmute your mics. And this is going to be my gentle reminder here once more that just if you do have your mic unmuted or somehow have your video on, please just turn those off now for everybody else's sake. Otherwise, Scott, no one here is here to listen to me talk, right? We're all here for this pretty exciting update here. So I'll pass it off to you. Thank you once again for coming on.
Great, thanks, Matt and Mark, and thank you for having me back once again. Great to be back, and we've got some fantastic news that we've just put out this morning with this additional acreage that we have put out, and along with this very exciting basin margin play that we're looking at. So I'm just going to run through a quick recap of where we sit, and then I'll take you through this new acreage and basin margin play and where we think that things sit. So we are located in the Cabora Bassa Basin, which is in the north of Zimbabwe. It's an area that was previously explored by Mobil in the early 90s. They did a huge amount of work and really focused on the Permian play, which, although promising, Mobil thought was more gas prone as opposed to oil prone, and there was no structured market for gas in the early 90s in that part of the world. Some onshore discoveries in Mozambique hadn't been developed by that stage, and so Mobil saw very little point in trying to discover more gas. However, fast forward 30 years, and there's a burgeoning gas and energy market in the region, and we see multiple ways to monetize gas. So when we looked at this opportunity, we really liked it. Mobil had de-risked it to a certain extent with a fantastic data set that they picked up, that we inherited. But we've taken it, taken the baton from there and really advanced this project tremendously over the last few years, and particularly now with this new seismic data set that we acquired last year, and I'll run through that in a second. So Mukuyu prospect, the well that we'll be drilling first, is the largest undrilled prospect in onshore Africa. It is 4.3 billion barrels of oil equivalent, consisting of 20 trillion cubic feet and 845 million barrels of conventional gas condensate. So an enormous target, 7 stacked reservoirs that we'll be testing with one single well. So a very unique opportunity to unlock a very large resource potentially. The second well that we'll be drilling is the Baobab prospect, and that's in the new Basin Margin play that is analogous to some of the East African Rift string of pearls discoveries, and I'll show you some comparisons in a second. It's something that we're really excited about. We've matured it from its conceptual stage when we first had a look at the Mobil data, and when we looked at the configuration of the basin, and we're thrilled at how it's turned out post the seismic. It's even better than we'd hoped. So really excited about this new acreage that we've picked up and what's in it. So that's from a technical perspective, really exciting. But again, the change has been in the above ground scene. So it's not the technical or below ground potential that Mobil were concerned about. It was really more about the above ground situation. That was political environment, which deteriorated in the latter half of the Mugabe era, but then also the lack of ability to commercialize it. So that has changed, and now we have already multiple offtake agreements in place in a success case for 1.2 trillion cubic feet over 20 years. That'll be the first great step, but we'll take it further from there. And there's a huge energy shortage in the region that we'll be able to make a dent in. We won't be able to solve it, but certainly, we'll make a large contribution. So looking at where we are located, we're up in the Cabora Bassa Basin here in the north of Zimbabwe. So this is the new license area. So this covers the conventional play fairway in the Cabora Bassa Basin. Further to the west up here and further to the east over here, the outcrop comes up to surface. So that's not what we're targeting. We don't want to, because it's not buried at the right depths to host oil and gas. We want to target stuff that is buried subsurface. So the conventional fairway lies in this portion through here. There is some additional potential in Cabora Bassa Basin in Mozambique, but this is now most of it's under the Cabora Bassa Lake, where the basin's got its name from. So we're lucky to be exploring on the southern margin where it's dry. We don't have any issues that they've had in some of the other basins further north. We've been surrounded by a lot of notable companies who are but Zimbabwe's been off the map for the last 20 years from an E&P perspective. One, because of the above ground situation, but two, also because that mobile data that they acquired and the studies had never been made public. And so the only reason that they came to light was because we went into the geological survey in Harare, sat there, read the hard copy reports, and uncovered this trove of information and potential that had been overlooked by everyone else. So the treasure map. So we have been, until recently, working in Special Grant 4571, which is this license through here. We put this application initially in this area because this was where we could see that big anticline based on those old mobile paper sections, seismic sections that were sitting in the geological survey. We obviously couldn't get access to the digital data in the survey, but mobile left behind rolled up paper sections with interpretation on, and this Muzarabani anticline, which is the Mukuyu prospect, stood out like the proverbial. So obviously, we went and located the original license here. This, when it was first applied for in 2005, was limited by the size in what was allowed to be applied for. 100,000 hectares were the limit, and so we chose this area through here because that's really all that we could see on the old mobile seismic. Once we started so when Invictus picked this project up in 2018, we then went and vectorized all the paper seismic sections. So the old mobile data, you can see the seismic lines here in light blue, very widely spaced, 15 to 20 kilometer line spacing, and very, very sparse coverage. But we could see this anticline on line 7, line 13, and line 2 on the old mobile data. But that was it. But very big structure, very robust, wasn't going to go anywhere, and that's why we decided to put the license application over there. Then when we started to integrate all of the data, so you're looking at individual paper sections, but when you put them together in a grid, so we digitized them and then did our own interpretation, we began to see some hints of this basin margin play through here. So remembering that it's only these little hints that we could see, just catching the tails of some of these prospects through here. But we saw the potential. And then when we reprocessed the mobile data the following year, when we finally got it, we could see a little bit more and see these trap configurations setting up against this basin bounding fault through here. And you can see that in this light gray through here. That's the basin bounding fault. So the reason that it's called the string of pearls is because that's your string, and then these are the pearls that hang off of them. So that's where the string of pearls nickname comes from. So we saw the hints, and only very, very, subtle hints, these tiny little closures that we could see through there, but we thought that there was a good chance that they would get bigger. And so when we designed our Cabora Bassa 2021 survey, the infill density that you see here was really to, one, pin down the Mukuyu structure to make it a little bit more robust, give us a lot more certainty on the extent of the closure. Obviously, we had to wrap it a little bit tighter because of the wide space data, so you've got a lot more uncertainty. So this was designed to optimize the drilling location for Mukuyu 1, but also to mature the Basin Margin play, which we always thought was going to get better and more defined. And the setup that we saw was similar to what we saw in the East Africa Rift system. So when we shot this data and we started to see it come through, we were pretty pumped, and it's turned out extremely well. We're so thrilled at how this has matured and evolved, and really exciting to take something from a play concept, a hint that we just saw very, very subtly in a handful of lines of data to something that's been matured, to a fantastic now portfolio of opportunities. And there's, out of the Basin Margin, we've got 5 of them that are drill ready. So that's a fantastic effort by the technical team to recognize it, to design the program, and execute it, and we're thrilled at how it's turned out. Probably our one regret, though, from that seismic campaign is that at the back end of it, so we started from west to east, is that we ran out of time, and quite frankly, we ran out of money to push this further to the east. So we'd seen these big leads. It came out better because we reprocessed the mobile data again concurrently with the CV21 survey, so that it was contractor consistent, datum consistent, and processing consistent. So these leads turn out a lot better with that new round of processing. And again, even just 3 years worth of advances in processing techniques has gathered a lot more out of that mobile data set than even 3 years ago from the original reprocessing exercise. So we've got some really exciting leads here in the east. Masumu and Mopani, very, very large, very interesting too. See these very interesting flat spots that we can track all along this line 2, the old mobile strike line, and something that we're definitely going to go back to and mature, and that could be done relatively inexpensively. So ultimately, we've ended up with a fantastic portfolio. We've got a huge fairway to play in. So this is roughly 90 odd kilometers across here, and an abundance of targets. And so, yeah, we're really excited of how this has turned out. I think one of the other things that I mentioned earlier as well is we knew from the trap density, typical trap density size of these string of pearls type plays, is that we'd have things hiding in between the mobile lines, and that's exactly what happened. So we've got Mukamba over here, which sits in between 2 of these lines through here. And so, exactly how we thought this would play out has come to fruition, which is always, pleasing to see. So now looking at the targets, we are going to be drilling Mukuyu 1 first. That's going to be drilled on line 9, I think, line or 10, I can't remember. And that's on the southern flank of Mukuyu. That's a little bit quieter, the structure. And the reason we've picked it, we've had a couple of new strike lines that we shot new data through here, which is pinned down the southern flank. If you look at the previous data, and I'll go through that in a second, through the center of the structure here, it's very, very faulted, where you've had that crestal collapse, and particularly as you go further north. In the south, it's much quieter. we can optimize the trajectory of that Mukuyu 1 well to test all 7 of those targets. So that's why we've picked this location. With the Basin Margin, we had, a pick of, there were probably 4 initially that we picked. That could have been the first one that we drilled, and ultimately we settled on Baobab for a number of reasons. But what this will do, if either of these work, is open up the running room in the remaining acreage. There are some independent new play types that we're working up as well, but those will come, and we'll be able to calibrate that a little bit better once we've got some drilling data and velocity data from the wells, which we'll be acquiring as part of the data acquisition program. So Mukuyu 1 up first, and then followed by Baobab. So Mukuyu 1 is a much deeper well, 3.5 kilometers, that will go down to, potentially deeper if we can push down into the lower Angwa. It will really depend on drilling performance. And then Baobab is a very simple vertical well, and that is roughly 2,000 meters, maybe 2,200, and that's a relatively simple well compared to Mukuyu. So where we sit is this is Exalo's rig 202. It's at the well site at the moment. We are in the final preparations for drilling. We've got a couple of things outstanding in terms of spares for maintenance that Exalo's been undertaking. The rig is sitting on 0 rate at the moment because they've carried out their maintenance plan. Typically, you take a rig once all of this is done, but Exalo wanted to do their maintenance on our site because, from a logistics point of view, it was much easier than doing it on Songa Songa Island in Tanzania. So that is, look, we've had some delays, and some of these are unavoidable. But to be honest, it's probably served us well, because we've had a few delays with Baker Hughes importing some of their equipment as well. And with these operations, you just need one piece of equipment to not be functioning or not working or not have arrived that holds you up, and then you've got a rig sitting and waiting. So this has in fact worked out to our benefit, and everything will be ready to go very, very shortly, and we'll commence drilling Mukuyu 1, which is a hugely exciting prospect. So 20 TCF and 845 million barrels of conventional gas condensate, the largest undrilled prospect onshore Africa. And so from an execution point of view, we will be drilling through to about 60 meters with a conductor. That's 26 inches. We'll then run the casing. We'll then drill the 17.5-inch hole down to about 650, 700 meters, and we'll cement that off through there with a 13 3/8 casing. We'll then begin drilling this first hole section of our zones of interest. So we estimate to get to the top of the 200 roughly 14 to 17 days in. Again, this all depends on how the drilling goes. We'll then be drilling down through the 200, through the 250, 350, and 400, and down to just above the top of the Pebbly Arcos. So that will take 10 to 15 days to drill through this section here. We'll then run a comprehensive wireline evaluation program that will include the traditional quad combo, which is your gamma ray, resistivity, density, and neutron. So that will provide us with information on the lithology, as well as the resistivity will indicate different fluid types, and the neutron density as well assists in that. And then we will also, in a success case, be running what's called a formation tester. So it's a reservoir formation testing tool, and that's got a probe that retracts from the side of the tool. So you lower it into the borehole, retracts from the side of the tool into the side of the borehole, and then it's got a pump which will pump out fluid. So using the probe that is attached to the side of the borehole, pump the fluid out from the reservoir, and you'll have mud that invades into that section. So you got to clean all of that away to get a clean fluid sample of what's in the reservoir. It's then got so that just disposes of whatever's pumped out, and it's got a waste outlet that will just pump it into the borehole. And then it's got the ability to divert clean fluid samples, and we've got an onboard fluid analyzer as well, so we can look at, and that's got will tell you what the composition of that fluid is, and you'll be able to tell whether it's gas, oil, or water. And then it'll divert that. You've got the ability to divert that into an onboard sample chamber, and then those get sealed, and then you bring them up to surface. So that will take anywhere between sort of 2 to 5 days, depending on how many zones we've got to sample, and then also how many zones of interest we've got to log definitively. So and then we'll go and get some mechanical sidewall cores. So that's a little again another little tool that's got a drill bit that goes into the side of the borehole. We'll cut a core, retrieve it back in, and put it in a chamber. So that'll allow us to get actual rock samples and core samples from the side of the borehole to help us with we're getting the large diameter ones, which will help us get porosity and permeability information and help calibrate our log data to that. So that's another 3 to 5 days. So we're looking at definitive results from this first hole section, so the 200 down to the 400, probably 25 to 30 days from when we spud. We will then case and cement this section off, and then we'll drill the 8.5-inch hole through the pebbly arcos, the upper angua, and then potentially the lower angua as well. That will be another week's worth of casing and cementing, and then another again 10 to 15 days worth of drilling, depending on how things go, and then again another comprehensive wireline formation program for this bottom hole section, and that'll take us roughly through to sort of 50 days post drill. We've given a range of sort of 45 to 60 days, and best estimate of 50 at this stage. So that will be Mukuyu 1. Baobab will be similar. It'll just really be this first hole section through here that we're talking about. So again, looking at that sort of 25 to 30 day type period for Baobab. So on to the Basin Margin play. So this is the map I showed earlier, and we're looking at this red box along the Basin Margin through here. So we've got the string of pearls sitting along the basin bounding fault. And what we've done is just take a few of these random lines through each of these 4 prospects. You can see where they sit in relation to the rest of the lines over here. And really, this is just to show you how the string of pearls works across the basin. So Baobab is the one that we'll be drilling. So you've got probably I should start a little bit further north. So this is this basement high through here, and that has been caused by a compressional event which has pushed the basin from north to south and created that fold, and that's what's created that anticline, and this big anticline in the middle of the basin through here. So you've got a little ridge in the basin that runs through, and you've had some of that pressure exerted into this basin margin area, which has created these little rollovers against this basin bounding fault through here. So that basin bounding fault is this granitic basement that we have here, and you can see the shoulders of the Rift Valley and the escarpment. If you look at some of our images of the rig, you can see the escarpment in the background, and that's how these Rift Valleys are set up. And we've got this very flat valley floor through here, very, very gentle change in undulation. So change in elevation from west to east of about 40 to 60 meters across the basin. Very, very benign, very fantastic conditions to work in. And that's why our seismic campaign was, pretty easy in terms of its acquisition compared to a lot of interior Africa. So these string of pearls have been created by that compressional event that's caused these little gentle rollovers into the basin bounding fault and creates those closures. So Baobab in the very west, we've got Kigelia, which is a smaller little lead through here. But Baobab that we're focused on here. So we've got a number of horizons that have this little rollover. And then as we move further east, we've got Acacia, Marula, and Mimosa. Now the basin margin is a much shallower play, potentially more liquid prone because of its younger age and also potentially what we believe is the source rock that's unique in the basin margin area, and it's this little wedge of sediment that you see through here. Now, this is only present along the basin margin, and that's because we had this huge, big basement high that had already formed along this along the central axis through here, which and you can start to see it in the corner through here. That's caused this onlap through here. So this was never deposited anywhere further because it couldn't get up and over this anticline, this dome that had formed already. So it's really settled just in this area through here, and this bright wedge through here. This looks a lot like what we see in the Lockheed with the Lockheed shale, where you've got this bright wedge of sediment, similar scenario, which is the kitchen, and then provides the source for these traps further up. So we've got a number of these along this basin margin, and really, really exciting to have a number of these prospects that will be, unlocked if we have some success. So just zooming in on the Baobab prospect, this is the closure at the 200 through here, and you can see we've got some full closure, but towards the base we've got this three-way into the basin bounding fault through here. That's that big gray line that you see here, that basin bounding fault, which corresponds to this blue one through here. So we've got roughly 16 square kilometers of closure in Baobab, and that is defined by a very tightly spaced grid. We've got a strike line through here and one further north as well. So very, very well mapped, and something that is going to be a pretty exciting first up test. So looking at how this has evolved and why we were so excited when we first saw it, and the Lockheed is a basin that I studied a lot. I was involved in a sales process for this basin, so got an inside look at at all of the data from when these were drilled. And what we began to see when we first started looking at when we first got our hands on this project were these similar hints along this basin margin and the string of pearls play that we see through here. So this is in the Lockheed in Kenya. This has been a hugely successful basin for Africa Oil and Tullow. It's resulted in around 800 million barrels of discovered resources. They haven't drilled there for a while, obviously with the downturn in the industry and the troubles with some of their JV partners. This has been on hold, and also with the low oil price, it meant that the development hurdles were pretty high. But the minimum economic field size that they were basing this on was roughly 250 million barrels to get that development over the line. So Ingamia, this was the first well that was drilled in the Lockheed in this basin margin area. Loperot through here, also previously known as the Lobster Prospect, and our chairman, Stuart Lake, was at Shell when this was drilled. and Shell ultimately left in the mid 90s again with the low oil price. But this wasn't very well covered, this basin margin area. But Loperot had proved that there was a source in the basin. There's no seeps in the Lockheed. There's some outcrop where they've sampled the source rock, similar properties, lacustrine source rock, same as what we're chasing in here. Different age, albeit, but rocks don't care how old they are. It really is about their thermal history and burial, and rather than the age of them. And so with the basin margin, when Tullow and Africa Oil picked it up first after Lion Energy, we were in there, and following the success that they'd had in Uganda, Tullow came and farmed into the Lockheed, and Ingamia was the first well that was drilled. So we see here again all of these sitting along this basin bounding fault. You can see that grey fault through there. They've also got a little bit of an escarpment through there. So very, very similar looking in terms of their situation. This is roughly a 50-kilometer play fairway. And again, once one of these works, the success rate is prolific. So 88% success rate in this basin following the first discovery. So, subsequently, all of these little pearls along here have been proven up. And that's what we're hoping to do and repeat that in the Cabora Bassa. So Ingamia and a comparison of the two prospects. So structurally, very, very similar. We've got the basin bounding fault sitting through here. As we do, we've got these rollovers into the basin bounding fault, which form your traps. And then we've got these alternating sequences in here from a fluvial lacustrine environment. Ingamia, when it was drilled, its pre-drill estimate was 45 million barrels based on 5 square kilometers of closure. Post-drill with some 3D, particularly with these, because of the sharp angle of these basin bounding faults, it does sometimes create issues with the imaging. And so once they got 3D over it, it actually became a more pronounced rollover through here, bigger area under closure, and it ended up being 25 square kilometers and 297 million barrels. So again, we're just imaging these off 2D. They're very robust. They're big, relatively speaking, but not necessary to shoot 3D until post discovery. Looking at Ingamia and how that unfolded, again, we've got, and the reason that we like this is because we've got stacked objectives in this basin and stacked opportunities. And Ingamia found 6 separate pools, not, albeit relatively modest in terms of their thickness, but again, you don't, once you're aggregating stack pay, it very, very quickly adds up. So we're not talking about huge columns here. Some of these sands are in the order of 5 to 10 meters net. This is 2, this one, and some of them are in the sort of 25 to 30 meter type of range. So you don't need much, but when you've got stack pay, it adds up very, very quickly. Then looking further afield to the Alberta Graven, so that's up in the just to the northwest of the Lockheed. And again, we see a very, very similar setup. The basin margin play, there's probably fewer of these in the Albertine. The one very big one though is Kingfisher, which is through here. The difficulty with the Alberta Graven though has been the presence of Lake Albert. So modern day lake, you've got the rift shoulders that sit up here, and then you've got a little bit of valley floor to work in, but then you're in the lake. And so when Tullow and Hardman, and in fact there were a couple of earlier wells drilled to the southwest here by Heritage, which actually found CO2 and gas, but further up to the northeast where Heritage, I beg your pardon, Hardman and Tullow drilled the first well, which was was Warrego, quickly followed up. So they drilled back to back as well. They drilled in Puta straight after that, and then those basin opening discoveries quickly unlocked the rest and set off the takeover for Hardman Resources, and Tullow bought them out for $1.5 billion. So Warrego was only 50 million barrels, I think, and Imputa's a little bit bigger, sort of closer to 100. So these sit along the basin margin. Kingfisher, very, very big field. I think that's roughly 200 or 300 million barrels. In Gassa, though, and this is where we see sort of more similarities with Mukuyu, are these big four-ways out in the basin center. So in Gassa, very, very big field. Tullow, though, had to drill it from the shore and drill it from the shore and deviate it to reach their objective within Gassa. It hasn't ever been followed up because it's too tricky, and they ultimately ended up relinquishing it because it was too hard to develop because it was under the lake. As I said, very, very fortunately, we are on the valley floor through here, and the lake is further north through here in Mozambique. But coming up now, and this is called the Nile Delta play, in the Alberta Graven, that's where we see this platform coming up here into the east of our license area, where you get some of these, some of these bigger features through here as well. So again, we really like the setting of the Cabora Bassa. It shows a lot of similarities to these other very successful and prolific rift basins further north. And again, once you taste some success, it's from an industry perspective as close as you get to shooting fish in a barrel. But we've seen that repeated in the Perth Basin with the Kenya play. I'll touch on that in a second. Maybe I'll just finish on Warrego here. And again, just showing this is another line. So line 6 for Baobab. So that's a little further to the west of where we'll be drilling it. But again, you've got Warrego, which is that basin opener for the Albertine, your basin bounding fault here in red. These gentle little rollovers into the basin bounding fault, setting up those traps. You've got a couple of these faults through here that's been caused by that rifting process, and we've got a very, very similar setup through here. And again, you don't need huge pay zones. Through here, there's 30 meters in total. Tested 12,000 barrels a day on test, and 50 million barrels. You aggregate 5 or 6 of those, and you're going to get bigger ones. Baobab's not the biggest one that's in the basin of these basin margin prospects, but it's one that we think is a good play opener to test the play, and that's the most important thing to do. Make sure that you make a valid test of the play. So, again, really exciting to have this in the officially now in the portfolio. We've been salivating over it for a long time. It's been frustrating not to be able to unveil it earlier, but we're pleased to now be able to show it off and put ourselves in a position to now have a second play to test, which is equally exciting to Mukuyu in our opinion. So from there, I think I covered off on the red project in the last presentation. So I'll park that for now, and I'll wrap up there so that we can do the Q&A.
Terrific job. Thanks, Scott. Oh, well, that was a hell of a lot to get through. You've done well.
Look, it is. It's quite chunky to chew through. But I think, look, we're really excited. It's a play type that's been proven. Mobil, looking back at their paper sections, you can't really see this on this basin margin edge there, and in the Albertine and the Lockheed, those discoveries hadn't been made yet when Mobil were exploring here. So again, it's something new that we've taken from success that's been had elsewhere, that we've been able to apply to a similar geological setting and mature this. So that's been really pleasing.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. It's got to feel good to actually be able to talk at last. It's hard work, all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
So we've got a bunch of questions. So we had all the guys,
Sure.
same as last time, on Discord and Hot Copper and elsewhere. Streams of questions have been coming in online as well. And so the areas we want to go through, there's going to be stuff talking about the Gazette and the and permitting, etc. We're going to have a chat about technical. Some guys want to know about partnering and JVs, monetization, a few questions about the cap raise, then the carbon project, and if we've got time at the end, there was a video by Trove that had a few technical queries and questions as well.
Yeah, sure.
You might want to attend to some of those, but being as you're very much in the technical mind at the moment, I think we'll stick with some of our little technical queries and then hand over to Matt, if that's all right with you.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So the first one we've got is, so everyone pretty much understands now, I think, where we are with Mukuyu. So some of the technical questions on that. So do we really expect the 200 and the 500 horizon could both be hydrocarbon bearing? And what do you think about some of the migration pathways and timing to be able to drill these?
Yeah, so we think they both can be filled, and that's based on multiple charge histories from in this basin, and that's because there has been periods of uplift as well, and it's brought different parts of the basin in which we've got this kitchen out in the north through here, which is, and Mukuyu is a huge feature, and it's got a big fetch area that sucks all of the source and the generation from this kitchen through here. But in other periods, and remember, we've got multiple sequences of source, so they're going to come into their own at different parts of their of this thermal history and positioning of that source rock in a vertical sense, through which relates to temperature throughout throughout its life. So we are so the 200 we think is a separate source from a younger source rock in the Cretaceous, and the Pebbly Arcos, which is the 500, is from the Upper Angua.
I think that's a really good point to help people understand, because those that are not geos or oil and gas technical, they think about just one position for source. But if you've got multiple source horizons and then multiple tracks, then definitely there's the opportunity.
Yeah, right. And you've got the time component as well as this basin evolves. So we've had and there is the ability to charge horizons above it when you've got leaks through faults, charge up faults. So that does happen too. Okay.
So, assuming, and no doubt it will be, everything goes successful with the drilling and the exploration, etc. What happens on the flow testing side of things? So, do you need new permits? And what's that going to take to be able to go along and do flow testing? When would you anticipate being able to do that?
Sure. So from a permit side, we've got everything we need. Our EIA was renewed. We don't need anything further. So that's all in hand. The testing, though, will require additional equipment that we'll have to bring in. So that's test spreads, so separators. We've also got to, and it depends on where we're successful in the sequence. So if it's one zone, we can probably cheap Charlie it and just do it up the casing. But if it's not, then we're going to have to get some tubing, so that we can isolate particular zones, move the tubing up. We've got bridge plugs are easy enough to source at the moment. Build a bigger flare pit, obviously. That's always a good problem to have.
You're spot on.
And then, so test spreads and that equipment isn't something that you just order for a wildcat well, because it's got to sit there. We need some time to plan the test as well. Well testing is not simply just about flowing it to see what the rate is. There's a very specific reason that you well test, and that's really to get dynamic information from the reservoir. So when you design these well tests, if you imagine that you've got a pool and you are throwing a pebble into it. So we do, depending on what kind of test you design. So let's just talk about isochronal tests, where you will throw a rock or a small pebble into the pool, and then you're watching the ripples. And if you imagine that's the pressure wave that you're sending out so you're withdrawing fluid from the reservoir, you're flowing it up to the surface, and that's causing a pressure change from where you're immediately at the wellbore location compared to the average pressure that you've got in the further afield in the reservoir. So if you imagine throwing a pebble in and that pressure wave propagates out from where that pebble initially landed, we've got to order gauges as well. So downhole gauges to record that pressure data, which is pretty close to where you're flowing from. So you're measuring that pressure data, and what you're looking for is that response of how that pressure wave propagates back. So if you imagine if you throw it into a pool and you throw it in the center and it reaches the sides all at the same time, but if you move it slightly closer to one boundary or one side of the pool and you throw that pebble in, that wave is going to hit that one side of the pool earlier.
Yep. And
that information will tell you if there's a boundary there. So this is what you're looking for in your reservoir. If there's a fault, if there's some kind of change in your fluid type, sometimes you can see contacts. So you're really designing these tests to try and gather as much data as you can from a dynamic sense, not just the flow rate data. Yeah. So we're not talking about onshore US wells that have very limited drainage areas that, you don't care where the boundary is, you just want to hook it up and flow it. These are, we're looking at big conventional reservoirs where we want to know what the minimum connected volume is, where the potential boundaries are, what the far field reservoir properties are. There's a lot of information that you can gather from flow testing, based on some very sophisticated mathematical techniques, deconvolution, and so it's not just a case of just flowing and see what she does. Yeah. It's a little, there's a lot more science to it. So we've got to do a little bit of planning. We've got to order the gear, and so that a well test won't happen until next year in that case.
Okay. So is the thinking? I mean, again, in the ideal world, discovery in both worlds. Will you look to then do flow testing after drilling both? By the sounds of it.
Yeah, we've got to then have a think about what the sequence is next. What are we going to go and do? Are we going to go and appraise Mukuyu? Are we going to go and try and drill another one of these basin margin prospects and extend the running, the play a little bit further to the east? They're all fantastic problems. So I think we need to look at what the results are. What is then going to set us on a path to early commercialization as well, where the most bang for our buck is in terms of data gathering and information and de-risking, proving up reserves or continued resources first, and then reserves, so we can get to that critical resource threshold early and get on the way to commercialization. So that will, it's hard to tell you what it'll look like at the moment, but those are the sort of thoughts, where our thought process will be around is. Okay.
So to help people understand a bit about your flow testing, so you won't still need the Xalo rig. What will you be using instead for the testing?
Again, we've got to look at, you don't need big rigs for testing. You need a workover rig, but it'll depend on the availability of them. Versus mobilizing a workover rig, all of that rigmarole. To be honest, it's probably cheaper to use Exono's 202 rig for that early testing site. Later on, and where Tullow and Africa Oil ended up in this basin is really drilling appraisal wells and new exploration wells and some of the new prospects, and then doing a long testing campaign of a number of them together, because it makes sense to do that. So we might do that post some appraisal where we've got some other wells to test as well, or some new, if we decide to go and drill some of these others on the Basin Margin, to add those in. So we've got a multi-well testing program.
Okay, so you sounded like you're going to be pretty flexible with this. See how things go.
Yeah, you need to. It's hard to to kind of predict how everything's going to pan out, and you need a little bit of flexibility so that you're not so rigid in your approach. So this is the way we have to do it. There's a lot of ways that we can approach this, but I think the theme of it is to make sure that we can get to that critical resource, that minimum economic field size, and prove that up first, so that we can start that commercialization process as quickly as possible.
Okay, so just checking on again, just quickly on the permits. So because you said you got your permits, etc., for Mukuyu. Do you have all the other Basin Margin well permits in place as well? Yeah.
So this is all covered under our EIA. So when we did our EIA, our study area extended from out here all the way through to what's this border post called? I think Mukuyu, all the way out to the east here. We covered the entire basin. So all the baseline studies, everything's been done, and then the process with Emma is really just an addendum to your EIA, and because we've covered it, it's that's already done.
Okay, so then again, back to as you're working your way down, will you be looking to, as you strike with each horizon, being able to give an update to the market, and is that the sort of thing you'd call discovery, or would you wait till the end? How do you play that sort of announcement?
Yeah, so probably just going back to the evaluation program, we will have LWD, so logging while drilling. So those are real-time measurements that we'll get from just behind the bit. So your gamma ray tool sits roughly 2 to 3 meters behind the bit, and then we'll be running resistivity as well, which will give us some indications on fluid type. So that'll help us in that sense figure out where we are in the broader scheme of things, sand versus shale, not having to wait for the rock chips to come up the returns, because that takes a little while to circulate from the bottom of the hole to get up to the surface. So that'll give us real-time measurements. With conventional reservoirs like this, often you will get shows, whether that's gas or oil shows. And we've got the added complexity here of in that 200 horizon, where it looks quite a substantial column, potentially 300 or 400 meters and overpressured. What that means is we've got to get our mud weight, and I think I spoke about this last time, we've got to get our mud weight right to ensure that we can maintain control of the well, because when you drill, your mud weight is equivalent when you're circulating it downhole to a pressure, and you need to ensure that pressure at the base of your borehole is greater than the pressure that the reservoir is at. If it's lower, then your reservoir is going to cause an influx, and then it's going to blow your mud out of the hole, and then you lose control of the well, and that's a really dangerous situation.
Yeah.
So because this basin hasn't been drilled, we don't have a handle on what the pore pressure regime is, so that pressure profile as you get deeper, what that is from a baseline perspective, and then what the overpressure potentially is on top of that going into that 200 horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're in a scenario where we take a kick, so a kick is a pressure influx, which is, again, it is a hazardous situation and something that you want to get under control quickly. So what you do then is you add heavier components to your mud, barite, and weight it up so that it increases the weight of the mud and then the pressure at the bottom of the hole to maintain that control. So that ensures that it's kept under control. And then that'll be your first clue that you're in something overpressured is taking a kick. We're trying not to take a kick because we don't know potentially what the pressure is. So we don't want to get this wrong, because if you get it wrong, it has consequences. Yeah. So we have taken extra precautions that if we do get it wrong, that we've got a diverter that we can divert the returns that'll come up from the well bore to a flare system that'll just burn it off, so that we don't have to kill the well, which and use the blowout preventers. You don't want to do that, unless it's last resort, because particularly if you've got shear rams, then you lose your well and you've got to re-drill it, and it's we don't want to be in that situation. So we're going in with quite a conservative mud weight. So that's designed to ensure, one, we don't take a kick or only take a small kick, and then two, what that may do is suppress those shows if it's significantly, if we've got a significant significantly heavier in our mud weight, then that may actually suppress any influx of oil or gas into the wellbore and in those returns. So that's not the be all and end all, though. With shows, I think quite often we've had instances of companies that have drilled, they've announced shows whilst they're drilling, only to do the wireline, and they're not able to retrieve a fluid sample or get the wells to flow. So shows don't indicate a discovery. That's the first thing. You also get shows when you're drilling through source intervals. So not the reservoir, what we're looking for, but the source that actually generates the oil and gas. So the combination of things will be, if we do take a kick and we do flow gas to surface because we've taken a little kick and we've got to send it to the diverter, then that technically is a discovery. That's a material event. It's definitive. We'll announce it. If we don't have a kick, that doesn't mean that that it's a failure. It just means that we've got our mud weight right, which is what we're aiming to do in the first place. We've then got those LWD tools behind the bit, which will provide us with some real-time information with gamma ray and resistivity that'll help distinguish the lithology type, so sand versus shale, but then also fluid type from the resistivity. Brine, which is the fluid in your reservoirs that they start off with, has a different resistivity to oil. It has a different resistivity to gas. So that helps us distinguish what the potential fluid type is. And then, so we'll get those measurements. Those are also good indicators, but they're not definitive. Logging while drilling data is very, very coarse in terms of its sampling rate. So you're typically sampling over an interval that's anywhere between 1 to 2 meters. Mm-hmm. When we run the wireline tools, that's very, very fine scale data that we're gathering. Your typical sample rate is then 5 or 6 centimeters. So you get really, really high detailed information. So only once we've finished the wireline of that whole section will be announcing results. If we don't, and so that will be the definitive determination of whether we've made a discovery in that first hole section. So remember, that's only down to the 400.
Yeah, I was going to say that's down to the top of the Pebbly Archive. Is that right? Yeah.
So just above the Pebbly, just above top Pebbly Archives. So
okay. All right. So just getting back onto a little bit more about sequencing then. So so there was some questions about why was Baobab selected as the target on the Basin Margin compared to others that are on the Basin Margin. Is it just purely for logistics because it's near to Mukuyu?
No, not purely for logistics. There's also some other considerations in there: drilling trajectories, access to charge, robustness of the traps, some of the DHIs that we're seeing in Baobab as well. So all of that. Look, there wasn't a lot in it, and we had a lot of debate in the team, and we went around and around in circles with which one to pick first to drill. So in the end, we settled in Baobab because of a range of factors. So we had a ranking and a risking system that we employed. There is some probably opinions that come into that as well about people how they feel about this particular one versus another. And
Stuart win?
Look, Stuart's got a strong opinion on a lot of things. But he was pretty good, and what he was very good at doing in his career when he was running new ventures teams is trying to steer everyone and make sure everyone's heard, gets all the opinions out of the table. It's not dominated by because often I've been involved in this before. Often the prospects that get drilled are the ones that one particular person is the noisiest about. And there's ways to change the particular parameters, particularly when it comes around to risk. If you go back historically, companies have this rule of thumb: we're not going to drill anything that's greater than that has less than a 15 or 20% chance of success. And so people would just change a couple of parameters, and they're risking to get it to that minimum threshold.
We've never done that.
No, well, that's with competing groups and teams competing for budget. This is all done fairly methodically. But people will have particular opinions about particular prospects and what they, and that's often based on past experience. So with all the input from our technical team, and we had some input from some of the potential partners that we were talking to as well, and which ones they liked. So Baobab won out at the end of the day, and actually coincidentally, the well location that we picked for it, when we went to do the initial scouting site, right on the corner of the well pad is an enormous baobab tree, where the site will be. So whether that's serendipity or not, I'm not sure.
I'll go with it. I'll take any sign.
But also another pretty interesting anecdote from last year before we shot the seismic campaign, when we did the traditional ceremonies before we started the campaign. We had one of the old, so they're called nangas or witch doctor, probably is the term that the West would use. Who practice traditional religion and traditional medicine. Before we shot the seismic campaign, he said, "I don't know why you're bothering with the seismic. I'm going to tell you. I know where the oil and gas is." And he said, "It's you're wasting your time doing this. I'll just tell you where it is." And he actually pointed out a site. It's not too far away from where Mukuyu 1 is getting drilled. So it's one of those, and if we make a discovery, we're never going to hear the end of it as well. And I'll be glad, but it's quite Well, yeah, we won't. We'll. You know, I can then get rid of my technical team and just rely on the bones being thrown to tell us where to drill next.
It sounds like it happens with water dividing as well. Anyway, same thing.
Yeah.
So what about moving on then between the two? So when do you think you'll start prepping, or have you already started prepping the second well pad?
Yeah, so they've completed all the traditional ceremonies to bless the well site of Baobab as well. The civil works. Now they're just having a look and seeing what the subsoil profile's like, seeing how much aggregate we're going to need for the pad. Baobab's going to be a much smaller pad. We're going to leave the camp at the Mukuyu site and just move the rig. So it's only 10 k's away. And there's a brand new, beautiful highway that is being built. So it comes down the escarpment, and the tar road previously ended roughly here, just after Mukuyu. But they're extending it now because they're building a new highway up to Kanyemba, where the border of Zambia and Mozambique. So there's a brand new highway, and it's just about past where we turn off to go to Mukuyu. That's being built at the moment. Beautiful wide lane road. So it's 10 k's along that. It's a pretty easy commute in the morning and in the evening for the guys. So that'll save us time. It'll save us money as well, not moving the camp. So Baobab preparation started, and that'll follow on immediately from Mukuyu. So once Mukuyu is done and the wells left in a safe state, hopefully suspending it to be tested, we'll then move the rig to Baobab, set it up, drill, and then complete that.
So that's looking probably about end of November for spud, something like
that. Yeah, depends on where we sit in that 45 to 60 day time frame with with Mukuyu. So we're probably looking at
mid to end of November.
Spud from mid-November, I would think.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think is the wet season going to have any impact on you with your drilling?
No, not drilling. We get a little bit of rain in November, but the rain doesn't really start in earnest till sort of mid to late December, and then the really heavy periods kind of January, February. But again, we're on the right side, Baobab, of one of the rivers. There's no bridges that we need to worry about and cross. So it's and we're on a tarred road, so it's pretty civilized.
All right, sounds lovely. Okay, and my last question is sort of semi-technical, money. So when it gets into the appraisal, what's the thinking? Once you've done your testing, you've got your prospect, you're going to go back and do appraisal. What's the thinking about the funding needs for that? Is there any sort of initial estimates of what we think appraisal might cost?
Yeah, so look, your appraisal wells are typically more expensive than your exploration wells, and that is because you upsize your data gathering program. So we'll be running additional wireline tools, and that'll be formation images, so FMR formation image log. Also probably NMR, nuclear magnetic resistance. So there's other more sophisticated tools that you typically run as well. And then we'll be doing conventional coring as well, because you want to gather actual bits of your reservoir so that you can then calibrate it back to your logs, not just small data points that we'll be gathering with the small sidewall cores, but whole core throughout your reservoir. So that coring, much slower, more tripping, and then your post evaluation of that data is also more expensive. So your exploration wells are, depending on depth, data acquisition program, etc., are typically 20-30% more expensive than your exploration wells. Also, then if you're looking to utilize your appraisal wells as future producers, you're going to up spec your casing. So we're just using carbon steel for this because it's low grade. We're not expecting to have to use Mukuyu again, because often your exploration wells aren't drilled in the ideal locations. Yep. They're designed to be cheap throwaway wells to test what you need to test, and then you come back and you appraise with a purpose. So, it'll depend on, we'll design our appraisal program, and that'll be the number of wells we need. And that's really to address what you're trying to do with appraisal is address your uncertainties and reduce it. So whether your uncertainty is where your gas water contact is, for example, so that's going to determine your column height, which will determine what the fill of your reservoir. You're going to go and try and pin that down at a location where you think, right, well, this is where I think the gas water contact, we can intersect it there and really pin it down. If it's reservoir quality, you're going to go and test something that your seismic tells you is a different signature, to try and calibrate your good seismic signature that you get with, and you've got a data point now with a well, and to go and calibrate somewhere different. So that will give you more information. If it's top structure in a different fault compartment, is this fault compartment charged? We've that's probably our biggest uncertainty going with an appraisal campaign is going and appraising, the central and the northern part of the structure, because it is more faulted. So looking at your connectivity across your fault blocks, do they communicate? Are they hydraulically separate? So all of this comes into your thinking, and that'll determine, and it'll evolve as you drill appraisal wells. Sure. Too. So we'll go out with an appraisal program to try and eliminate, well, not eliminate, you can never eliminate uncertainty in subsurface, but to reduce as far as possible, at as reasonable cost as possible. You can spend huge amounts of money appraising stuff. Yeah. And ultimately, and a lot of big companies do that, and they have these gold-plated appraisal programs where there's a lot of money wasted, and it doesn't give them much more data or information. It makes people feel good getting more data, and that goes back to the 3D versus 2D debate, that I've been asked on before. If you had an unlimited budget, sure, you'd go and shoot 3D data before you did this, but is it actually going to change your decision on what you want to do? No, it's not. So you can waste a lot of money in these appraisal programs, but what you want to try and do is reduce your big uncertainties as far as possible, and you're trying to narrow your range between your P90, your minimum case, your P10, which is your upside case, your high case, and then your P50. And as you gather more data, you want those to converge and that uncertainty range to reduce. So, the appraisal campaign will really be dependent on this initial exploration results.
And the funding of that is going to be either self-funding, or that could be JV time, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So that then opens up the door for different types of JV arrangements, and different types of carries. What we were looking at before was carries for the exploration wells, because people want to have that as a kind of stop-go decision. How's the exploration gone on? We've taken the big risk up front, and then it's heads up after that. Once you're in this discovery territory and basin opening territory, and you've proven the petroleum system in the basin, and that your play type works, and then if you've got other prospects in that play, then you're in a much different negotiating position, and that's where you can very much easier conversation, because the risk has been taken away. Not all of it, but certainly, it's far reduced. So then you open yourself up to multi-well appraisal program carries, development carries, etc. So if we look at how the Lockheed Basin unfolded here, Tullow and Africa Oil were 50-50, and they went and drilled quite a number of discoveries before Africa Oil decided to farm down.
Yeah.
And they sold 25%, so half of their 50, to Maersk, who came and bought it for 450 million in cash plus a development carry for the initial development. And that's resulted in Africa Oil now. They had a huge cash war chest that they then went and deployed and bought some production in Nigeria and are now printing money. And they did that. They did that during the downturn when they bought that asset. But so it does open us up then to a range of potential outcomes. So the further down the maturity funnel you can get, and by adding more resources. So obviously, the more you're shifting from the prospective resource category, undiscovered, into the discovered category, contingent resources, that brings you up the value curve. And then if you're moving that from contingent resources to reserves, where it's commercially viable, obviously then that has increased value. So that also plays a part in the thinking. Do we partner early to bring in and help with some of the funding? And it depends on your ability to fund it as well. So I think we've had good support in that realm. And for the cost of drilling exploration wells here, let's call it, with an appraisal program, let's call it 15 million a throw for the Basin Margin, and maybe 20 million for Mukuyu appraising that. Then you're looking at being able to add a huge amount of value through unlocking new discoveries and then bringing in a partner after that. So again, certainly very, very good problems to have.
Okay.
Or someone might come along and just, like what happened with Hardman with Tullow, and they see it's been unlocked, it's been de-risked, and it's a strategic position in the basin, it controls all the running room, and someone may just say, we've got to have this in our portfolio because it'll be material.
No, absolutely. All right. There was I'm trying to actually keep on the theme before we get over to Matt, and he'll talk about some other bits and pieces. There's just people talking about, I'm sure you see this Trove video, and they just asked some questions about.
Someone said it to me the other day.
Yeah, they were talking about prospect definition, seismic amplitude, source rock, sill capacity, and topside issues. I think you've covered most of the queries and questions that these guys had in there, talking about the prospectivity that we're looking at. Was there anything in particular that you'd heard or understood, that there was any points you wanted to put out there?
Yeah, look, probably just, I guess, the main thing, and look, I don't know who this guy is. I've never had a conversation with him or had any dealings with him. Someone sent me the video the other day, and watched it. I think probably the main thing is that he's been working off some PDF slides that we've put out. And some of that was from the very, very early days when we just started out, and we were working off the old mobile paper sections, the old maps that they had, and really this has evolved orders of magnitude beyond from where we first picked this up. So I think some of the criticisms on the amplitude and the shutoffs and the depth of them, I mean, that's just me putting a line on PowerPoint across the bottom of it, and maybe sometimes when I'm doing them, these things, the base map slips when I'm moving them around to and so look, relying on PDF presentations, great source of information, but to do that kind of analysis without all of the data behind it, that's pushing it a little bit. And the reason that we have had these independent resource estimates done is exactly this, because we've got nothing to hide. We hand it over to to these independent resource assessors. They have access to all the data, all the basin modeling, not just PowerPoint slides. They've got actual, and they can go and do whatever they want to that data, look at our interpretation, do their own independent interpretation. And they came up with the numbers, not us. They've got nothing to gain from, from those numbers. They're not doing it to do me a favor. No, ERCE are an international company. They've got very, very strict, as all the resource houses do, because particularly the international ones, not just the kind of domestic onshore US ones. So it was done by the team in Perth here, as well as Singapore, and then it's sent over to London to their head of, so it's got to pass a very thorough QC process. So these aren't just numbers that have just been agreed on in the pub. Oh, does this sound good to you? And me saying, oh, can we make it 20? No, that's not how it works. So, I think questioning if he's got an issue with the numbers, you can contact ERCE if they're willing to, and they probably won't discuss it because it's all confidential. But they can give it the assurance that he needs, that they did their own independent work and are happy with the numbers and the assessment and all of those petroleum system elements that come into it, into those numbers. And then I think on the size side of things, questioning whether this is the biggest undrilled prospect onshore Africa. If you can find a bigger one, please let me know.
Yes.
I will eat my blazer with a knife and fork on your next podcast if you can find a bigger undrilled onshore prospect in Africa, seismically defined, independently, assessed. So
I'll join you. I'll eat the right sleeve. You can do the left one. All right. So look, mate. So I just think that it's up for others to go and have a look, compare. But I know where I'm putting my time.
No.
It's all enough said. That's all good. All right. So we'll rock over to. So Matt's got a few queries. I think he's going to go through the Gazette and monetization cap. So are you okay? Probably for another 20 minutes, half an hour. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yep. Carry on.
All right. Beautiful. Well, thanks for all your responses to everything technical. It's mind blowing. Fantastic, mate. Matt, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so far, Scott. Very enlightening, very illuminating conversation. Just a quick follow-up on Mark's queries. Just notably a lack of a resource estimate for the Baobab and Basin Margin. Could you just give us an update on when we might expect that, or when might the market expect to see that released?
Yeah, sure. So that's in progress with ERCE. In fact, I've got a meeting with them later this morning to go and have a look at the draft numbers. So I haven't seen their numbers yet. They've been sitting with them, and that's so that we can get this out. And then, there's a bit of news flow planning in that as well. So we didn't want to have it because if you have it, it's material and you've got to release it straight away. So, it's not far away. The process with these things is that they do the draft numbers. We're going to have a review of them, make sure that there's no big busts in terms of the assumptions that have gone in or the independent work. And we had this with Mukuyu. If you look back to the column height debate that we had, and there's some discussion in that in the back of that prospective resource release estimate. So sometimes things like that take a little bit of working through, where you have a different opinion, but ultimately they put out independent numbers. So ERC said, this is our methodology, this is what we're comfortable with, and this is what this is how our numbers work out using our assumptions. And we say, okay, well, these were our assumptions and this is what our numbers are. But ultimately we adopt the independent numbers because that's what we do. We've never put out internal numbers, precisely because of it just leaves you open to criticism. I think also it's stuff that numbers that you can stand behind that makes your partners feel comfortable. as well, that it's been independently done. And, you know, I always like to make sure that we are, when we gather more data, that we're maturing it and it gets bigger, not the other way around, where you throw out these huge numbers up front and then you're chasing, you know, you're forever chasing it. And then when you put out or get independent numbers done, that you go backwards. That's never, you know, it's never a good sign. So, you know, and again, if we look at what unfolded in the Lockheed chart, in Ingamia, when it was first drilled, 5 square kilometers of closure mapped on 2D. Then once they drilled that initial well, they went and shot 3D, and then Ingamia as a structure grew, and ultimately it ended up at 300 million barrels. So I think people should also keep that in mind, that you want to be adding to your resource base as it matures, not the other way around. We don't want to go and drill something that goes backwards.
Absolutely. No, very logical. And I don't, so next question here, a bit of a garden path here. I don't mean to go down too far. And sure. I anticipate that likely you probably can't give too much in the way of concrete detail, but is there, how much daylight or discrepancy or diversity is there between, you know, in this discussion you're having with how much discrepancy is there between what Invictus is bringing to the table compared to third party, or what your expectations or data?
Look, most of the stuff we're pretty aligned on. It's really Mukuyu is, and the Basin Margin stuff has been much easier because we're not dealing with enormous structures, potentially big column heights. So Mukuyu's quite rare in that you've got a lot of stacked prospectivity. You've got huge closure at all of these levels, which makes people a little bit nervous and uncomfortable. And I think I gave the anecdote when we were chatting to some potential farmer partners about the size of it when we first, you know, when we did our initial rounds of the numbers internally, and we were like, wow, that's telephone numbers. And like John wound it back again to try and make it feel more comfortable. And again, it's, you know, getting back to this is geosciences and exploration as part science and part art. Mm-hmm. You know, being able to conceptualize these players, how they work, and then finding the science that backs up your story as well. So that caused a little bit more debate than usual. And again, it ultimately comes down to how much data that you have as well, because the more data you have, the more, you know, the less wriggle room that you have for debate, because those are the inputs. So it's for the Basin Margin, there's so far from our preliminary discussions and the input ranges that they have shown us, there's very little discrepancy on that. So. But yeah, it comes down to, and sometimes it comes down to personality with the people that you're dealing with at the independent assessor. So you've got some people who are just adamant, we will not do this. This is our method. This is what we're comfortable with. That's it. Unless you show us something else or an analog or another concrete piece of data, then this is what we're going to stick to. So we did that in some respects and showed them some other analogs where we had big closures. One of them being in, you know, Lockheed deep 600-meter column, drilled last year, overpressured, Perth Basin, perma-Triassic system. So they're like, yeah, okay, well, fine. So it often comes down to being able to back up the assumptions with some data, being able to, you know, to show your rationale, and but ultimately at the end of the day, the assessors are going to give you their independent view. You're not going to arm wrestle them, to give them what you want, because that's not an independent process. So, yeah.
No, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, I will transition now into the rest of the interview here. It's a bit of a grab bag, a few different topics.
Sure.
Obviously, a lot of news has come out recently, and people are just kind of, there's lots of questions and follow-up desire to know more or to understand a bit better, right? This first one probably is going to be fairly easy just because it's kind of post-mortem past tense. But could you just, this is almost kind of going back to the human element as you talk about with the third party and just how individual personality comes into it. But could you just run us through just the gazettal, right? I mean, obviously there was a lot of kind of stopping and starting, and could you maybe just, as much as you can, speak to what the delays, the cause were, and what happened there?
Yeah, sure. So look, the agreement that we reached in March, that was done, that there's a lot of bureaucracy in the civil service, and probably something, Mark, you won't like to hear this, but that's been inherited from the British due to the, obviously the past, and Zimbabwe's been isolated from the rest of the world for the last 20 years, and doing business at a pace of what foreign companies need and what we've needed to get this done in a reasonable amount of time, even though we've been pushing. They understand what the urgency is. Sometimes, it's just hard work, and we've got to deal with a lot of different ministries across a lot of different functions, a lot of different people that we've got to try and coordinate and corral. There's a lot of uncertainty with this because it is something that is, potentially enormous for the country. No one wants to make a mistake. No one wants to have the finger pointed at them. So typically they're very slow in the decision making, or the easiest thing is just to not make a decision, because then you can't make a mistake. So the other element in that is that, going back to the previous Mines and Minerals Administration under, at the end of Mugabe's tenure, that mines minister, Walter Chidakwa, and his permanent secretary, Francis Kuchikanga, were prosecuted because they didn't follow the right procedures, and they went beyond what their remit and authority was. And so you've got that. And so you've got some of these junior bureaucrats who've seen that and think, I don't want to get in that position. I'm not going to do anything unless I'm instructed to or told to, and they've got to be wait for that to be done. So there's often, that nervousness of that happening. People haven't understood what we've been doing because it's a new and novel industry in the country, and so progress has been slow. But we've got a fantastic team on the ground there, and we have to be patient as well, because we can't just immediately go straight over people's heads, because then we poison our relationships with people that we've got to work with in the future. So we've had to be observant of some of the business culture there, and the practices and the protocol and the procedures, and do that. And then when it gets to a point where we cannot wait any longer, then we step in. But that's a call that we have to make every now and again, not often, but we did do that in this case, because we said to them, look, we've got these long leads that we've ordered, we've got the rig, we've got to start building the pad, we've got to get the insurance in place to drill this second well. If we don't have it and we don't have the title, we cannot do it. And then that's it. We've got to release, the services companies and the rig, because we can't sit here on standby, burning money whilst we're trying to rush on a well pad. So we did have some very high level discussions where we just laid out, right, this is the urgency, this is what we need, and so once that instruction came, then it was done. So it did take a long time, and we have been frustrated that we couldn't do it sooner. We would have liked to have unveiled this earlier, obviously. And then this will probably, I'm sure there'll be some questions on the cap raise as well. but it would have given us the opportunity to include retail now because we would have had more time and a longer gestation period until this happened. But as it stands, with the rig there just about ready to go, that window was closed, unfortunately. So that's been frustrating. But at the end of the day, it's been done properly. It's been done correctly. And now we can get on with the program.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we will return to the cap raise, and I will highlight what you said there about just the timing of it throwing off the ability for retail. That is a question that came up, sort of frustration or consternation, right, from people who are present investors hoping to be involved. But let me just we'll get there. I'll finish off one more question here on bureaucracy. Is there an update on PPSA? It's on.
Yeah. So the Petroleum Act, the amendment for that is in the finance bill that's being discussed in Parliament. It's a very, very simple amendment. It's really just changing the definitions. And so once that has been passed, then that will allow the execution of the PPSA. So without that amendment to the petroleum bill, the PPSA can be signed, but the enforceability of that is really questionable because it's just a direct agreement between us and government. It's not backed by any legislation. So that's why the step has had to happen. And in the opinion of the Attorney General and the ministers who are involved, the quickest way to do that was to put it into the finance bill. That's it's an omnibus bill that gets passed as part of the budget, like a lot of countries have, because trying to table a separate bill to be discussed in Parliament just on this thing would have caused a lot of delays, because there's other competing bills that have to be put in ahead of it.
Yeah, excellent. So I will switch gears here now to just discussions around partnership JV farm-ins. Obviously, I hope that everybody recognizes that this is material information that Scott's not going to be able to speak freely and in great detail with this, but Scott, anything you can provide, I guess, right? But have you been approached about farm-ins, JVs? Obviously, yes. More recently, conversations, have they changed? Maybe number of parties, interested parties. Can you just explore or expand on that idea?
Yeah, sure. So we had obviously the interest from those parties that we announced. We had a few others subsequently. I think it's always a trade-off, because if you have a really hotly contested process, a lot of companies will stand back and think, oh, well, this is already, it's hard to compete. So that we did have interest though, and I think as this matured, and as we got the Cabora Bassa seismic data that came out, the resource estimates that came out for Mukuyu, that obviously generated a lot more interest as well from people. But ultimately, we chose the path to go and solve this ourselves, and it was really around the look-through dilution of the cap raise versus what we would take on with a farm-in partner. And we stated this, and I've stated this many times, we were going to take a dual path of farm up or sole fund and choose what we thought was the best route for shareholders. We always knew that we would re-rate off the back of this additional acreage and this basin margin play and these leads further in the east, because it is a fantastic addition to the portfolio, and it's a material upgrade in our portfolio and our prospectivity. So we always knew that was going to happen. It was frustrating that we couldn't execute the timing of that and the approvals of that, so we could have done it earlier, because it would have put us in a better position on a couple of fronts. One, from a partnering side of things, to try and increase some competitive tension now that was opened up. It's hard to approach companies because when they come and see us, all they know about is Mukuyu. so it's hard to solicit interest for other companies who'd be interested in this type of play. Say we'll sign a CA and then we'll show you what, and getting CAs executed in oil companies is a nightmare. Their legal departments are something else. So look, frustrated with the timing and how that unfolded. At the end of the day, though, if you told me that we'd be in a position when Invictus started off that we would have been chasing not one but two wells, Mukuyu's 20 TCF, potentially billion barrel play in the Basin Margin, and we'd be able to sole fund a seismic campaign and drill those two wells, I would have had a hard time believing it.
Yeah.
So to be in that position to control the running room in the basin, probably the other factor that comes into it is we're currently a single asset company. So the downside of us farming out and failing is the same as, whether we brought in a partner or not. It's still, it's still going to be, pretty disappointing, and that'll be reflected in the share price. But for what we could self fund at now and retain that upside and all of this running room, if we're successful, then wow, it is going to be a phenomenal outcome. So, and we've given ourselves a shot at now 2 wells, 11 targets across those 2 wells. We need one of those to come in, and we're good. So yeah. So that's where the sort of partnering side of things sit at the moment. Obviously, that's parked for the exploration side of things, unless someone comes in over the top, and even then, it'll probably be a very quick no at this rate. And then, some of them want to pick up after the exploration results. Particularly some of the larger independents who are looking at this from a strategic kind of play. So
yeah, thank you.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So I will switch gears here. We've got a couple of topics left here. 2 or 3 here left that I'll try to be somewhat efficient with. Maybe we will just switch gears and talk about the capital raise before we light a fire under you and get some questions into you. Maybe a more neutral or objective one here is, your capital raise was jointly managed by Jet Capital, which is a US based investment firm, right? Could you just, how did you pick them? How do they fit into your efforts? And you're obviously starting to try to expand your reach to make your Invictus more international. Could you just kind of speak to those efforts as well?
Sure. So Jet have worked with PAC Partners, who've been our sort of house broker for the last couple of years, and they've had some successful transactions with them. They have a number of energy focused long only funds that they deal with, and so that from that side of things, it was for us to go and try and get interest in the US. I don't have any presence in the US, really many contacts. My contacts are more sort of on the European and UK side, where a lot of the Africa focuses for oil and gas. So there are some Canadian companies, but again, so our experience or our presence in the US, so we needed some help opening doors there. So that was, we had a virtual roadshow in the US. I think you saw some buying out of the US as a result of that a couple of weeks ago as well. So we have always targeted it. Some of those investors who came into the cap raise were successful with Recon. They invested pre-drill and obviously did very handsomely out of it. So they recognize this as a similar potential to unfold in that respect. So yeah, that was the rationale behind that.
And so the question I have next is regarding lots of questions and obviously always a hot topic with a capital raise are the terms of the deal, right? I guess could you just how did you come about? Was it a 10-day volume weighted average price, or what did you use to how was the actual price of the raise calculated or confirmed?
Yeah, so typically what ends up happening is that you work off a range of factors, and it depends on the behavior of the share price in the lead up to that raise. So, we had a pretty hard run over the last month, and particularly over the last 2 weeks. So, with the quantum of capital that we were raising, pretty big raise, 25 million. Particularly for essentially as an exploration play, that's a large lick of capital with that's not a slam dunk. So there is that risk attached to it. To execute a raise of this size required us to bring in institutional investors. So not just high net worths, but actual funds to come in and cornerstone. So when they look at a share price that's run hard like that, particularly with ours and what it did in the previous few days, there's a little bit of hesitance. And so with those metrics of last close price, 5-day VWAP, 10-day VWAP, 20-day VWAP, what's taken is in the lower range of those. So that's ended up on the pricing of the raise. I think probably also what wasn't in our favor is the volatility of the markets at the moment. So there's a lot of risk off appetite from the funds because of what we've seen it this week. A bit of a sell-off, and then coupled with a high risk exploration play and the risk premium that goes on that as well. So to bring in those quantums of capital, we need the institutions. For the institutions to play, you've got to offer them a discount, because if to try and go and buy that stock on market, they can't do it. And so in those sort of quantums, and for them to, some of them wrote out $5 million checks for these, so for that, we're not talking about, a 5 or 10 or 50 grand on market purchase. It's quite a significant amount. So those funds then typically set the pricing to do it, to underpin it. And with the hesitancy in the market at the moment, they're a little bit like lemmings. As soon as one goes and it's set, then they all go. So from a structure of the raise, obviously, it's not thrilling on our end. I'll be honest, but once we made the decision to go and sole risk this, essentially you're then swimming naked, because you've then got to go out and execute that raise for that amount of money. And if you don't fulfill it, and you've let everyone know that you're going to raise, and then you can't fill it, then you've got a real problem. Because then you've got no farmer partner and no money. And so the structure of the capital raise had to be sufficient that we would get the demand and get it filled. And you don't want to fill a book, to go out for 25 mil and get 27, because a lot of those are soft bids and some of them fall away. So you've got to ensure that there's enough demand and appetite for it. And unfortunately, that does mean having to do these at a discount and with those kind of structures. So from a retail shareholder point of view, I absolutely understand why people are frustrated, because we haven't been able to offer the same terms, and that's not us doing it. That's just how the corporation's law works. Yeah, you can only offer those type of raisings. We had to, when we decided to do this whole raising, we've got to execute it quickly, because if it drags out, that's in no one's interests, because typically deals that are dragging out mean that you're having problems raising the money. And so we needed to strike quickly, make sure that we could get the quantum of funding that we needed and support, and make sure that when we went out for it, that it was going to get filled, and that we had everything that was required. So leaning on to the why couldn't we offer retail the same amount, that comes down to a number of factors. So firstly, the timing of it. Again, I mentioned earlier, we were hoping to have this additional acreage locked away before that, so we had enough time and enough lead up that we could do it on similar terms. We had tremendous support from our share purchase plan that we had in January that we launched. I've never seen a share purchase plan that's been swallowed like that. It was, and I had a lot of emails, and I answered all of them about, we should have seen the demand coming, and honestly, looking at, and we based it on conversations with our solicitor, with the brokers on the structure of the share purchase plan, and looking at some of the other ones that oil companies had done previously. Some of them had done 1.5 million. It took them 4 weeks to fill, and they had to send out multiple reminders. Some had done 3 mil that didn't get filled, and there's a shortfall after 4 weeks. So when we did first come, first serve, expecting it to get filled, maybe a little early, would have been, 2 weeks, maybe, particularly because it was over the Christmas break when things kicked off. But we were just blown away at the support that we had, and it actually took us completely off guard and on the back foot when Link phoned us after the first 24 hours and said, we've had nearly 3 million come in, and that was as of stuff that had been cleared the last previous night. So coupled with that, we've already done a share purchase plan this year, and you can do an SPP one in every 12-month period for up to $30,000. So that meant that had already been ticked off, and then a rights issue to kick that off now, this close to drilling, meant that would have had to be open through the drilling period, which puts people in a difficult position. So ultimately, to bring in the quantum of capital that we needed, this is the type of raise that we needed to execute. So, but I understand why retail shareholders are frustrated. This is unfortunately how the Corps Act laws. It's not fair. This is stacked against these kind of scenarios do jeopardize retail shareholders and the support that they show for companies. But unfortunately, that's how we have to work within the framework that we're in as an ASX company. So.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that. I will. I mean, I have a couple of comments and then maybe I'll return to try to have some questions. So, I mean, I think essentially you've provided your answer, which I think is there's reason. There's a reasonable logic behind it, right? I mean, that pre-revenue explorers, you live and die by financings, right? So, I mean, speaking as a retail investor, all I can ever do is trust that you're a good steward of the share of the stock and of the float, right? That you don't provide needless dilution, knowing that you will constantly have to dilute because that's how you stay alive, right? I mean, what's the alternative? You don't finance and then you just go home and it's all over, right? So I do understand that. I guess there's maybe it's a two-part thing, and I'm asking this just because there's a lot of interest in people to hear from you, and I do appreciate you taking this on the chin a little bit, I guess, right? But the terms were. And your logic was generous terms provides the rapidity of response that you need to get it done prior to spudding, and right, that was your logic. Is that fair?
Yeah, and look, the attaching options at a 1-for-1 is not ideal. It was a tough market period over the last few months. This is a high risk play. it would be under that category. And also the runway that we have of completing the raise and then getting to results is also quite short. So there's a number of factors that played into that. Obviously, for me being the largest shareholder, I do not want to dilute myself any more than I absolutely have to, because I've got the most out of anyone to gain out of this, most to lose too. So I've had a lot of comments to saying, you're just, giving cheap shares to your mates. They're not our friends. They're investors. It's not like I'm handing this over to mates who are getting set at for 10, 50 grand here to get a cheap seat in a small little raise. This is a big raise, and it's in the jurisdiction also plays a factor in that. Bringing in North American investors into something in Zimbabwe, that's also a factor. So, I accept the criticism. It's not, but at the end of the day, we needed to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position to get these 2 wells drilled. And that's the most important thing, because that's where the value is going to come from for the company, is making discoveries. And the only way that we can do that is if we're funded. Ultimately, that 1-for-1 OPI is only going to come into play in a success case scenario. So, if you look at the initial dilution, it's 12.5% roughly for that 25 million. And if we are successful, that's going to bring in another $40 million into the company, pay for our appraisal campaign, and for a little bit more dilution. Yeah, I get it. It's not ideal, but everyone's going to be smiling if it comes in, and people are exercising these OPIs, because that means that we've had some success, and that is ultimately what's going to drive the value of this company. And after that, once it's de-risked, those further fundraising conversations are very different, again, because we've taken the risk off the table. At the moment, there's still a lot of residual risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, negotiating from a position of strength is always obviously preferable, right? And I think, it's a point well made, right? That there's still a lot of risk that, well, if you're an institution, you're going to want the discount based on that, right? I guess maybe just following up on what you just said, let's say discovery 1, 2, doesn't matter, right? Let's say when in 6 months we meet again and Invictus has commercial oil. What does that next raise look like? I mean, what is the next round? Where is your money coming from at that point? Are you?
Look, as I said, that'll depend on the path that we choose. So that'll either be self-funding some further appraisal with or additional basin margin prospects, shooting some additional seismic data in the east here to go and mature those leads, because those are pretty exciting. Shooting some 3D across this basin margin, also probably across Mukuyu, and then so it's going to be a combination probably of whatever money comes in from option conversions, and then also you're looking at much slimmer raises post that, and the dilution effect. If we're successful at either of these, we'll be a $1 billion company, and so going to raise 20 or 30 million for an appraisal campaign, that comes at a much lower dilution rate. Plus, we'll have option conversions. I've got no doubt. So that means, that dilution post then, and we've seen it with Recon Africa, with their program. So, initially they did 25 million for those 3 wells. They only ended up drilling 2, but they had some options that were exercised. The great thing there is they've got you can accelerate the expiry date of those, so you can force people to convert earlier, whereas the ASX doesn't allow that. But that brought in a lot of money for them, and then they did a $70 million raise, and it's had very little impact on the overall share count, because you're raising from a huge market cap and raising for onshore exploration relatively small amounts of money. So again, I think in the future those are great problems to have.
Just two small topics left here. Just some questions about monetization and I guess the calendar to which that would be achieved. Of course, given the hypothetical that there's a declaration here in the coming weeks. Dr. Stuart Lake, right? He's talked about 6 month timeframes. I mean, is that realistic? What is a realistic expectation here after the declaration for a turnaround time? I mean, obviously there's a large difference between a few trucks servicing a couple of wells and taking it and building pipelines, etc. But I mean, could you just just discuss timelines and realistic expectations, I guess, right?
Sure. So from a monetization point of view, obviously it depends on what's discovered, oil or gas. Whether or not it is, and the depth, the composition of it, whether it's got any impurities in it, that really depends on that pathway. From a practical perspective, though, from a liquid sense, condensate oil, that's really easy to monetize, because we can just strip it in condensate case and then truck it to the port to Barra and export it from there, because you've got international buyers then that'll take it. Gas, though, what we'll look at there from an early monetization point of view is probably some small scale gas to power, where we can do that on site. You've got modular, small scale gas to power units that you can buy now off the shelf. It's not complicated stuff. We've got just on the backside of the escarpment here a mine called Eureka, who've gone into they've resuscitated a mine, gone into production. They burn a lot of diesel. They and so doing a short little run up here, and then we're into the grid as well. There is electricity down in the valley here already, and it's probably a little bit small in terms of its immediacy of who would take it, but we could get it out of the valley then and into customers further down, further south of us. So that would be the initial kind of monetization route for us. In terms of a time frame, we'd probably look at that implementing it post appraisal. So and then you're working off doing an extended well test, and that is for a few reasons. One, you can generate some early revenue by implementing those sort of schemes, but two, you get a lot of early production data from your reservoirs, which is hugely valuable then planning your full field development, because you can get some really useful dynamic reservoir information that'll tell you, more so than the pebble in the pool example that I gave you earlier.
I'm going to use that one.
Yeah. You then you're getting you're getting information because you're withdrawing more volume. You're getting information from much further afield, and you can firm up your minimum connected volumes, whether you're seeing any connectivity across any faults, your long-term reservoir performance. So those are really useful bits of information that you get from these early pilot schemes. And we did it at Waitsia, which was great, and it really helped us optimize that development, so that you're not drilling unnecessary development wells as well, because you're optimizing your well count and placing of them. So I would say, in a all things going well, from a revenue perspective, maybe the back end of next year.
for sincere revenue generation starting to occur.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now one very brief, two questions left. One is hopefully brief, because I appreciate your time, but where we're obviously starting to stretch here and I need to respect that. And then the second one maybe is slightly longer, but still I think is still relatively short. But confirmation of spud date. Can you is there a timeline or a date that you can kind of circle the calendar for us?
Sure. It's been a bit of a moving feast with this maintenance program and Baker. So the latest I've got, so we're waiting on a control loop for the top drive to come out of Poland, and they had to go and send that back it got to the airport and they realized it hadn't been programmed, so it had to go back and get programmed. So which I'm glad that happened before it came out, because there's not much good if you can't operate your top drive. So we're probably looking at early second week of September, I should say.
No, good. Thank you for that. No, sorry, continue.
Yeah. So.
All right.
So we're probably a week or 10 days out.
Thank you.
Tops. Yeah.
And then I guess we'll end with this, because honestly, and this is I agree here that you spoke about carbon capture in the carbon project, and I think that honestly it kind of went over people's heads in our previous conversation, that I'm not sure if people obviously are very early days and very kind of speculative and hypothetical at this point, but massive potential value there. Could you just briefly reiterate for people here that just the monetary benefits of the revenue generation potential of the carbon project, just one more time for us?
Sure. So, and I think maybe going back to the Trove, one of the other comments is why they bring in a carbon capture project now. We've been probably start off with whether you like it or not, and whether you even believe in it or not, that this has become an investment criteria to have some kind of carbon neutrality plan. Yeah. Now there's two ways you can go about it as a company. You can either go out and try and generate your own source of credits or emissions mitigation measures, or you can go out onto the open market and buy offsets. So if you're going out to the open market and you're buying offsets, that's a cost to you as a company to get to that carbon neutral plan. If you are generating your own, obviously that then becomes cost neutral, because you're not having to buy them. It's still a cost to you in a certain extent, or it's going to be a positive if you're in the position where you're generating excess credits that you're not having then to go out and buy. So on the self-management or self-generating aspect of it, you've got two options. You've got either offset generation, or you've got carbon capture and storage. Now, we're of the view, and I did a little bit of CCS stuff in my time in a previous life. It's hard. Number one, you've got to have the right reservoirs. You've got to be in the right location. It's got to be proximal. You've got to pipe it. The legislation's uncertain for the storage. I'm just talking about Australia here. But you've got companies like Chevron who've been doing it in Barrow Island. Barrow Island's a really well understood reservoir. They've been producing oil there for decades. They're just winding it up now. They've had hundreds of wells drilled in there. They know what the stratigraphy is like. They know what the reservoir is like. The problem with carbon capture and storage, in my opinion, and again, there are people much smarter than me who will have opinions on this. This is just our view, our internal view, that Chevron have battled with their project from a carbon capture and storage perspective. And if a company like as big as Chevron, with the people that they have and the resources at their disposal, if they have trouble getting it right, then we've got no hope in doing it. So for us, it was pointing us down the offset route. And I really got the idea from when we're doing our EIA. We've got there's another Red Plus project, one that's been around for 10 years now. It's one of the largest in the world, Cabora Red, that comes into our license area through here. And we had to do some work with them when we're doing our consultation process, because we have to consult with all the stakeholders in our license area and the communities that we're working in. Didn't understand it at first. And then when E&I started to pick up some of these Red Plus projects in Zambia and elsewhere, the penny dropped. And I was like, okay, I see what these projects are about. I didn't really understand them before, probably a lot like people haven't picked up with our announcements. But really what they are about is reducing environmental degradation and deforestation, because existing forests capture more CO2 and sequester more carbon than planting new trees, because they take a long time to mature. And so by preserving existing forests, you're doing more for the carbon sinks than the existing ones, than letting them be destroyed. So this Red Plus project is a framework developed by the UN to incentivize the preservation of those existing forests. And by doing that, you generate carbon credits, which then provide revenue to implement the projects that will preserve those forests. So the setting up of these projects, and really it's changed because the carbon credit pricing now has really taken off. Before they were relatively marginal when carbon offsets were trading in the sort of sub $1 kind of realm, and now they're at 10 to 20, depending on the vintage, the quality of them, the type of project that you have. In Europe, they're trading hands at 50 or 60, and in Australia, $40 to $60. So the cost of implementing them versus the impact that you have and the credits that they generate are now very, very different compared to when these projects first started out. So, and the pricing of them is going to get more and more expensive, because as we get closer to 2030, where a lot of these emissions pledges from companies that are all trying to reach net zero 2030 or 2050, the demand for credits is going to go through the roof as companies have to go to the market and source credits. So we saw this as an opportunity when we saw the tender come up for these projects, for us to not only have our own homegrown solution for a carbon offset project in Zimbabwe. It's local. We're not outsourcing the problem elsewhere like a lot of big companies are. E&I are doing it in Zambia and the Congo and elsewhere. We're doing it here. It's having impact in the country that we're working in. It's going to allow us to generate excess credits, that we can sell on the voluntary market and really run it as a separate business arm to the oil and gas side. But the risk was also now the requirement to be carbon neutral for funding criteria, particularly in a development sense for some of these big multilateral institutions like the Africa Development Bank, like the Africa Finance Corporation, who are going to provide a lot of the funding for this development. They need to see that you have a plan that will allow them to certify that, right, Invictus has got an offset plan. They've got a plan for their emissions. Under our criteria, we are now allowed to lend money to them, regardless of the merits of your project and the commercial aspects of it. This has now become one of these requirements. So we could have sat and waited until we made a discovery, then go out and try and source something. We would have lost the opportunity to get these projects. And then you're stuck and you're buying credits on the open market. And then you're imposing a huge cost on your business. And this is what companies are going to start to face. So one, it makes our project more attractive from a finance point of view for multilateral institutions, makes our product more attractive because they can buy carbon offset and carbon neutral oil or gas. That's a huge selling point. And then two, we're also having, a positive impact, not only in our local project area, but elsewhere in the country. So we saw this as a really nice integrated tie-up for us. And I think it's a fantastic project. It's going to be something that's going to generate a lot of money that we'll share with the Forestry Commission and also with the local communities that we're working in. So that's a win-win Sonar is going to provide us with credits. That's not going to be a huge cost base for us, very, very minimal, and it'll be offset by what we, the excess that we're generating. So I think it's been a really smart move on our part to secure something this size that's material in terms of the number of credits it's going to generate. On a smaller scale, if you look at what Cooper are doing, Cooper Energy, they're buying offsets for their Sol field from projects like these. But, they've been fine till now. They're going to have to buy more as they expand. If we're successful and we find, what we think is here, we're going to need a lot of credits. So, that's a bigger and bigger cost base for the business. So in terms of revenue, these things are produced on an annual basis once you're certified. So we think this can produce upwards of 1 million credits a year, and they're changing hands at the moment at sort of $10 to $20 and predicted to go to $80 to $200 by 2035 as those carbon neutral pledges come in for other companies that are going to be competing in the market to buy credits. So that's what's going to drive the price of them.
Good. Yeah, thank you. Just another, yeah, absolutely. And I think on that note that maybe this is time for us to, just say thank you and say goodbye, I guess, right? It's been, always, you're a patient and well-spoken man, and I appreciate both of those qualities. And I mean, thanks everybody for sticking around. It's still a pretty large audience here. If everybody can, please check out, if I can just do a little plug for myself, youtube.com/junior resource investing. And you can see a bunch of videos there, including this one will be up toot sweet quite quickly. Community investment server on Discord. Otherwise, Scott, thank you for your time very much. Thank you.
Matt, Mark, thanks for having me once again. Always a pleasure. And look forward. Hopefully the next one will be a very, very different conversation. We'll be discussing some results.
Let us go and do the interview again. That was a good dry run for your one on Monday, anyway.
Right. Yeah, look, that one's more aimed at some of the institutional investors as well, because they're not looking out for invites on Discord servers and that sort of thing. So I still don't even know what it is, to be honest. You'll have to explain that. You'll have to explain it to me someday.
My kids told me.
And then some of our other holders who would have seen the link details in the announcement and not seen this, so it'll just be kind of rehashing the presentation, not really this long form Q&A, which always happy to do, and I think it's a great format, and pleased with. Obviously, there's a lot of questions and a lot of interest, so really grateful to all of our shareholders. For their interest, for their support, understand some of their frustrations with the raise. But look, that'll be a distant memory for everyone in a success case. And we'll now we've got to go and execute our drilling program. We've got 2 wells, really exciting. Didn't ever think that we would be in this sort of position. So really pleased on that front, and looking forward to getting started and and providing results when we get the definitive data. Obviously, if we get some early really positive signs that are unequivocal, then we'll be making releases, but otherwise then for people who are nervous about not seeing shows or anything, that's not the be all and end all. We're not out there for shows. We're out there for reservoirs, discoveries, movable hydrocarbons to surface, and that is the definition of discovery: bringing hydrocarbons to surface, and that's what we're going out there to do. Not some shows over the shakers. So we set out our evaluation plan to do that, not to have just a couple of minor shows. So. And try and generate some excitement, and then nothing happens, and people are, there's too many junior companies who do that. That's not our modus operandi. So yeah, it's exciting period, and yeah, look forward. Hopefully, the next one will be out at the well site if the timing of where I think things are going to be work out. Then yeah, we can do one from live in the at Mukuyu 1.
That sounds excellent. Maybe we can we can compare our favorite champagne labels then, maybe two there, eh? So
well, it's a dry site, so I'll be no it's pretty restricted. But yeah, there'll be plenty of time for that.
Perfect. Thanks again, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jess. Cheers.
Cheers, Scott.
Take care.